10. Prehistoric beast. On an Alabama beach in 2021, fishing guide David A. Rose pulled something extraordinary out of the water and nobody could figure out what the heck it was. The angler was shocked and confused, thinking he had somehow hooked some kind of bizarre shark on the end of his line. It had taken him nearly 40 minutes to rip the fish out of the water and it looked like some sort of prehistoric beast from the past. He thought maybe it was a shark, but as David found out later, he had actually caught a Gulf sturgeon. These are some very rare fish and not often found lurking in the Gulf of Mexico. Before catching the Gulf sturgeon, David also caught a Gulf kingfish, a couple of stingrays, a catfish, a pufferfish, and even a crab. He was quite an experienced fisherman. He hooked the sturgeon using dead shrimp for bait. It was over 6 feet or 2 meters long and weighed around 130 pounds or 60 kilos, making it about half the size of what they can really grow to be. These fish have been around since the dinosaurs and can be up to an astounding 14 feet or 4.2 meters long. The main part of their internal skeleton is made of cartilage, very similar to a shark. But unlike a shark, their outer body is covered in bony, armor-like plates for defense. After taking a few pictures with the prehistoric monster, David threw it back in the ocean. After all, these are federally protected animals and are not allowed to be killed. Thanks, David. Number 9. The burbot. In Lake Erie, there is a very bizarre sea creature known as the burbot. Almost nobody has seen it, even fewer people have caught it, and most people don't even know it's there. But it is. The burbot is a giant eel-like fish that hangs out at the bottom of the lake and is the only member of the cod family that lives in freshwater. According to Mike Durkalic, an aquatic biologist with Cleveland Metro Parks, the burbot is a weird and secretive fish and not many people have what it takes to catch them. In December, Durkalic caught 2 of these elusive fish in gill nets, but not just because he could. He caught them to add implants to the fish with transmitters and then release them back into the wild, allowing scientists to learn a bit more about their behavior. Lake Erie in the 50s and 60s used to be bursting with these burbot, but then came industrial pollution and the invasion of the deadly sea lamprey, which feed on the native Ohio fish. Today, there aren't very many burbot left, making them a very slippery catch. 8. Ice fishing monster. Nicholas Colangelo was out ice fishing in Pennsylvania with his friends. They were expecting to catch a few little fish and just to have a good time out on the ice. The trip they'd taken previously had been quite successful. Nicholas had caught a huge musky fish from under the ice and was hoping to net another one this time. Instead, Nicholas caught something rather unusual. It wasn't a fish, and it definitely didn't belong under the ice. What was this mysterious creature? It was a duck. Specifically, it was a very rough-looking merganser duck that probably shouldn't have been under the ice at all. These ducks can dive for short periods of time, sure, but they definitely can't dive for the whole winter. These ducks usually migrate south to rivers that don't have any ice in them. This one must have gotten stuck as the ice was forming over the lake. Then it spent the last few weeks trying desperately to get out. Nicholas may have not caught himself a giant fish, but at least he gifted the duck its freedom. 7. The dolphin fish. Nobody is really sure where the dolphin fish gets its name. Some say it's because the dolphin fish swims frequently with dolphins out in the ocean. Some say it's simply because they act like dolphins by jumping out of the water playfully. But the dolphin fish also goes by another name too, the mahi-mahi. The name mahi-mahi literally means strong in Polynesian, and the name originates from Hawaii, where the fish are frequently caught. These fish are some of the most fascinating to catch as they're large, colorful, and honestly just strange to look at. Dolphin fish usually have a bright golden hue on their sides and then a bright green or blue color on their heads. What's really interesting is that as they start to die, the color fades and they become dull yellow. Even though mahi-mahi can grow to be over 6 feet or 2 meters in length, they actually start life as microscopic larvae hiding in seaweed. Because of this very smart breeding behavior, dolphin fish reproduce like crazy. It's highly unlikely the species will ever become endangered, even though they are so popular with fishermen. But just because they are often caught doesn't make it easy. Like I said, their name means strong, and it takes a lot of effort just to reel one in. Have you ever fished for dolphin fish, aka mahi-mahi? Let us know your experience in the comments section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Monster catfish. In Po Delta of Italy, a fisherman made the catch of a lifetime when he hooked a giant catfish that looked like some kind of monster from the never-ending story. The fisherman's name was Dino Ferrari, and he caught a potential world record-shattering Wells catfish that weighed over 280 pounds, or 127 kilos. It was also nearly 9 feet long, or 3 meters, making it a true monster of a catfish. What's really incredible is that according to the Seattle Times, the current record for a Wells catfish is slightly above an incredible 300 pounds, or 136 kilos. Still, Dino's fish could be the largest ever caught only using a sport fishing rod and reel, which really is in a category of its own. After taking pictures of him holding his catch, the Italian fisherman released it back into the water where it quickly swam away. The giant Wells catfish got to live another day, most likely terrorizing all the other fish that are much smaller than it. 5. Pink alien fish. In Mexico, a strange creature was pulled out of the water and mistaken for an April Fool's joke. The creature looked kind of like a fish, but also a little like a shark. It was discovered swollen, pink, and a little burnt. The fish was caught by the captain of a tourist fishing boat in Cabo named Jaime Rendon. The weird catch was made on the southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula. After the catch, Jaime posted the pictures online, not really sure what the thing was. But just because it so happened to be the 1st of April, everyone thought it was just a big joke. Nobody took the creature seriously, thinking Jaime must have just made the thing up using Photoshop just to trick everyone. But then someone came forward to identify the animal. According to fish experts, it was actually a very real fish, something known as a swell shark, a very small and rather evasive shark found throughout the Pacific Ocean. It's significantly smaller than most sharks you may be familiar with, but it does have a pretty interesting defense mechanism. When it needs to evade a larger predator, it fills its belly with water to look bigger. It also inflates itself with air when close to the surface, looking more like an inflatable pool toy than a real animal. Usually, these sharks are quite shy with divers and pretty harmless unless aggressively provoked. They tend to avoid humans. Most swell sharks are a soft yellow-brown color. The reason this shark was so pale and sunburnt is probably because it had albinism, lacking any kind of pigmentation and making it pale as a ghost, and indeed, a very crazy catch. 4. Fish with a face. Recently, in 2020, a fisherman in Thailand caught one of the ugliest fish in existence. He found a fish with a strange yellow body, weird white dots all over it, and a face just like that of a human, only way creepier. The fisherman caught the bizarre creature in his crab trap and almost threw it back in the water because it was so hideous and he was so shocked. He didn't know what to do with the weird catch, so he handed it over to wildlife officials because he was worried that such a disturbing fish would give him bad luck in the future. Now, it's believed the fish was a type of stargazer called Ichthyoscopus polycharis. Stargazers live at the bottom of a particular body of water, hidden underneath the sand with nothing but their eyes and mouth poking out, waiting for some unfortunate victim to swim directly over them. Their name stargazer is a little confusing because they don't actually gaze at the stars at all. They hide in the shallow waters of the Mediterranean as well as the Atlantic Ocean. The stargazer is what you would call an ambush predator, and they are very good at it. The only time their skills are lacking is when they accidentally bite onto a fisherman's hook. Not a good day for the stargazer. 3. Translucent blob. A translucent blob was captured off the coast of New Zealand and nobody could figure out if it was a plastic bag, a weird fish, or a transparent shrimp. Stuart Fraser was out fishing with his 2 sons when he spotted the strange animal floating at the top of the water and scooped it into their boat. According to Stuart, the blob felt scaly and firm in his hands, kind of like jelly, but there was nothing inside of it except for a weird orange blob that may have been one of its internal organs. Stuart had never seen anything like it before, and neither had his sons. After looking for help online, some fish experts suggested that the mysterious creature could actually be a salpa majora, a type of fish found only in cold seas and mostly in the Southern Ocean. They can grow to be about 10 inches or 25 centimeters. They sort of look like baby jellyfish, but the two are not related, as salpa majora are completely harmless, unlike jellyfish, and they're sometimes deadly stingers. The fish has a gelatinous body and only moves thanks to a special system of pumping water through its body. It literally contracts itself like a beating heart to slowly propel itself through the water. Other than that, we don't know too much about the fish. It eats plankton and is very rare, with hardly any sightings of the thing in the wild. 2. The Blackfish. In Connecticut, a man named Tim captured a record-breaking blackfish. It happened on October 14th while Tim was out on Captain Bob Woodward's boat. They had gone out to Two Tree Island in Niantic Bay when Tim suddenly hooked something he felt was huge. Tim had to put his reel into free spool and fight extremely hard to work the fish away from the treacherous bottom. According to Captain Bob, he's pretty used to hearing excited fishermen on his boat. But today was something a little different. From all the commotion, he knew Tim had hooked an amazing catch, but he couldn't quite anticipate turning around to see Tim holding a monster blackfish. It turned out later to be a type of tautog, and it was so huge that it weighed in at 26.6 pounds or 12 kilos, and it was later certified as beating the Connecticut state record by almost 3 full pounds or 1.3 kilos. That makes it one of the biggest tautog blackfish ever and just shy of 2 pounds or 0.9 kilos lighter than the all-time world record. Number 1. Cowfish. A fisherman in Oklahoma made a rather bizarre catch at Lake Eufaula. Austin Claunch captured a fish that looked an awful lot like a cow you'd see on a farm. Well, the coloring and pattern did anyway. The fish had a white belly and the black and white markings of an ordinary dairy cow on its back. It was such a weird thing to find that Austin posted the pictures online to see if anyone could give him a bit more information. Without getting much luck, he finally sent the picture to the Oklahoma Wildlife Department, who replied that the fish wasn't a new species or an aquatic cow. Instead, the fish was suffering from leucism, meaning it had partial pigment loss. It was basically halfway to being an albino, which explains why it was so pale and why it had a pink fin. The good news is that a lack of pigment doesn't actually affect a fish's health in any way, and it doesn't affect the way a fish tastes either. Number 10. Narcissus snake dens. Every year, tens of thousands of harmless red-sided garter snakes, Thamnopus sertalis parietalis, arrive at the Narcissus snake dens, a wildlife management area in the Canadian province of Manitoba. The snakes spend the winter hibernating in the area's natural limestone crevasses and tunnels, and at the end of the season, the snakes mate in huge orgies on the grass. It's the world's largest known concentration of the species, but it wasn't always this way. Back in 1999, after the population reached an unprecedented number of around 70,000, a bad winter killed tens of thousands of the snakes, bringing their numbers perilously low. The following year, the Narcissus Snake Den's Wildlife Management Area was established. Recognizing that many snakes died by oncoming vehicles because their migratory path crosses a major highway, workers created snake crossing tunnels and built fences to help usher them into the passageways. Since then, the population has recovered and no more than 1,000 snakes die in traffic every year. 9. Eyeless fish stranding. In early 2011, thousands of dead snapperfish, many who bore strange wounds and were missing their eyes, washed ashore on New Zealand's Coromandel Peninsula overnight. Fisheries officials acknowledged that the situation may have been deliberate and warned citizens not to eat the dead fish, although I'm not sure why anyone would need this warning, until they figured out where they came from and why. But no official explanation was ever determined, and starvation, poisoning, and natural causes were all ruled unlikely. When the same thing happened again around 2 years later, authorities still hadn't come up with an explanation for why it was happening. This time, however, they eventually ruled that an illegal fishing boat hauling in a broken net was likely responsible for the deposit of dead fish. Despite that, there was no word on whether the more recent incident was connected to the previous one. A massive cleanup of the rotting, stinking mess ensued as locals remembered the last time something like this had happened and grappled with the lingering lack of answers. 8. Raining birds. As Arkansas residents prepared to ring in the new year at the end of 2010, thousands of dead birds mysteriously rained down from the sky. About a half hour before midnight, an estimated 5,000 red-winged blackbirds, European starlings, common grackles, and brown-headed cowbirds perished over the city of Beebe. During that same week, large numbers of birds also died in Louisiana, Sweden, and elsewhere. Not surprisingly, preliminary testing on the dead birds in Arkansas ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma. In other words, they fatally crashed into various objects as they plunged towards the ground. As alarming and apocalyptic as these events seemed, scientists blamed media hype for any hysteria that came of it, and pointed out that it is relatively normal for birds to die en masse. Speaking with National Geographic, Audubon Society ornithologist Greg Butcher said that nearly half of the 10 to 20 billion birds in North America die every year from natural causes. In the case of them dying in large numbers, he explained that crashes and loud noises are two main culprits. Karen Rowe, an ornithologist with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, told Nat Geo that fireworks were set off just before the birds over Beebe plummeted to their deaths, pointing out that the affected species have poor night vision and typically do not fly in the dark. She explained that they may have already been disoriented and that the loud fireworks may have caused them to fly lower than normal. Thankfully, according to Rowe, 5,000 is a fairly small amount, considering that there are existing roosts numbering in the millions. What do you think of this? Do you believe fireworks are the #1 suspect in the bird deaths? Or is it something else? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons. 7. Mike the Headless Chicken. Surely you've heard the saying, "I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off," but have you ever wondered if it's really possible for a chicken to do that? Lloyd Olson was a farmer who lived in Fruita, Colorado during the 1940s. One day in 1945, his wife sent him outside to retrieve a chicken to prepare for dinner. Olson took his axe to the neck of a 5.5-month-old Wyandotte chicken named Mike, but he missed the mark in the strangest way imaginable. Left with his jugular vein, one ear, most of his brainstem intact, and a blood clot that prevented him from bleeding to death, Mike was still able to walk clumsily and perch himself on branches. He attempted to engage in customary chicken behaviors, like preening, pecking for food, and crowing. Olson decided to spare Mike's life, regardless of whatever horrible discomfort the bird was probably in, feeding the bird a milk and water mixture with an eyedropper and giving him small worms and grains of corn. Mike began touring the country with a sideshow and gained nationwide fame, appearing in dozens of newspapers and magazines. For 25 cents, members of the public could catch a glimpse of him firsthand as the sideshow traveled through their area. The Headless Chicken's owner became incredibly rich, raking in the equivalent of $52,156 per month in today's money at the height of Mike's popularity. In 1947, less than 2 years after surviving a beheading and rising to fame, Mike choked on a corn kernel at a motel in Phoenix, Arizona. The Olsons had left his feeding and cleaning equipment at the sideshow and were unable to dislodge the corn kernel from his throat on time to save him. Because the brainstem controls functions like breathing, heart rate, and reflexes in chickens, Mike stayed rather healthy up until his death. But it's hard not to wonder if he truly had any quality of life without his head, and that perhaps it was for the best that he did not go on living. 6. Exploding toads. German scientists and health officials were not only perplexed, but extremely concerned when some 1,000 toads puffed up to 4 times their normal size and exploded in Hamburg's Altona district in 2011. Dubbing the site the Pond of Death, the media jumped at the opportunity to spread hype, warning people to keep their children and dogs away at all costs. Of course, people theorized about what caused the amphibians to burst, with some wondering if the toads had committed suicide, while others entertained the possibility that they had contracted a virus that South American racehorses were spreading through the region. Amphibian expert Frank Muchman solved the case after examining both living and dead specimens and found identical circular incisions on their backs. Their injuries were the handiwork of crows who had evidently plunged their beaks into the animals with an insatiable craving for their livers. Muchman pointed out that the crows are intelligent enough to understand that the toad's skin is toxic, prompting them to go after the only part they perceive as edible. He explained that the toads only know they've been attacked after their livers were removed, at which point they inflate as a defense mechanism against their predator. Unfortunately, with no liver to contain the rest of their insides, the amphibians' lungs expand disproportionately, causing them to explode and spill the remaining organs. Because the toads exploded during mating season, Muchman surmised that the clever crows had taken advantage of their distraction, adding that the pecking would have been noticeable, but not particularly painful. It wasn't the first time toads had died en masse in Germany and elsewhere, including Belgium, Denmark, and the US. And while seeing so many dead creatures is undeniably alarming, Muchman summarized the event into a few simple words, stating, "It's just a part of nature." 5. Cocoon trees. In July 2010, Pakistan experienced an unprecedented monsoon season that brought 10 years' worth of rain in less than a week, causing massive flooding throughout the country. Even worse, the water was slow to drain and became stagnant in many areas, resulting in a so-called slow-motion disaster, in the words of Russell Watkins, a multimedia editor with the UK's Department for International Development who spoke with National Geographic. With nowhere else to go, millions of spiders and insects fled to the safety of trees, where the spiders spun thick webs, resulting in a cocoon effect. Images of the phenomenon went viral online. While people were divided on whether the cocoon trees were scary, fascinating, or perhaps both, it wasn't entirely a bad thing. Mosquito populations proved significantly lower than normal in these areas, reducing the spread of malaria and other diseases. This phenomenon has even occurred elsewhere, including in the Australian city of Wagga Wagga, where cocoon trees and even entire fields appeared after a flood in 2012. In what National Geographic described as an arachnophobe's worst nightmare, record rainfall prompted swarms of spiders from the ground-dwelling Linnifidae family to flee for higher ground. Entomologist Robert Matthews told Nat Geo that the sprawling webs these creepy crawlers created, which he described as a vast trampoline, were more likely a dispersal mechanism that enabled the spiders to escape flooded areas. So, much to the dismay of anyone who is terrified of spiders, these examples show just how resilient they can be. 4. Christmas Island crab migration. The Christmas Island red crab is one of 14 crab species found throughout the Australian External Territory, which is located in the Indian Ocean roughly 240 miles or 380 kilometers south of Java, Indonesia. At any given time, there are an estimated 40 to 50 million of these creatures living on the island. The population migrates annually following the first rainfall of the wet season, which can occur at any time between October and January. During that time, millions of the crabs travel toward the ocean to mate, with males leading the way and females following suit shortly thereafter. Their precise movement is determined by the lunar cycle. They time their migration speed and spawning just before dawn during a receding tide of the last quarter of the moon, according to Parks Australia. Somehow, the creatures know exactly when this very specific window of opportunity occurs and when it's time to scurry out of their burrows. After meeting at the beach to mate, male crabs head back home while females burrow on the shore. Each female produces up to 100,000 eggs in a single season, which she then releases into the sea. These eggs hatch the moment they touch the water, then the larvae ride out to the sea with a receding tide. Most end up being devoured by manta rays, whale sharks, and other predators. Once the survivors have formed into baby crabs, they head back inland. It's rare for a large number of the larvae to survive, but it happens once or twice every 10 years, and this helps sustain the population's numbers. The annual migration attracts throngs of tourists to Christmas Island every year who gather to watch as a seemingly endless stream of the animals instinctively move to where they need to be. 3. Beached herring. On New Year's Eve 2011, tens of thousands of dead herring mysteriously washed ashore on Norway's northern coast. Nobody knew why, but initial theories included the possibility that a predator, a strong tide or a storm, had driven the school ashore, or that the fish had possibly encountered a fatal oxygen-deprived environment. The people of Kvinnes, which sits above the Arctic Circle, began pondering exactly how to clean the 22 tons, or 20 metric tons, of dead fish. Then, just as soon as they appeared, they vanished, seemingly into thin air. Experts concluded that a combination of factors caused the mass stranding and disappearance, but they were not sure exactly what those causes were and said more testing was necessary to get to the bottom of the matter. Scientists were fairly certain, however, that the reason for the disappearance of the dead fish was fairly simple, that they had simply been washed back out into the North Sea. This was supposedly not the first time something like this happened. According to Jan Petter Jorgensen, who discovered the dead fish while walking his dog, a similar event had occurred during the 1980s, but a definitive explanation is yet to be found. Number 2. Cannibalistic lemur. The grey mouse lemur, Microcebus murinus, is an adorable primate that it's hard to believe we are distantly related to. By all appearances, lemurs and humans seem to have nothing in common with one another whatsoever. But we do share at least one trait with the creatures, as a team of researchers discovered in 2012 in western Madagascar. While searching for a tagged female grey mouse lemur, they found her dead, with a male specimen feeding on her remains. This particular species was never previously observed engaging in cannibalism, and although it had been seen in other primates, including chimpanzees, orangutans, and several types of monkeys, they had only ever been witnessed eating infants and juveniles. The discovery gave scientists their first inkling that non-human primate cannibalism is not limited to young specimens. It's unknown whether the male grey mouse lemur had murdered the female, or if he stumbled upon her remains and just took advantage of the available meal. Either way, it's quite curious, and just a little gross. Number 1. 17-year cicadas. When soil temperatures throughout parts of the US hit 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 17.8 Celsius, starting in May of this year, 2021, billions of cicadas began emerging from the ground for the first time in 17 years. Dubbed Brood X, the seldom-seen population announces its presence quite loudly, with swarms reaching up to 100 decibels. 17-year cicadas live throughout much of the eastern and part of the middle United States, making their very occasional appearances as far south as Georgia and as far north as Michigan. They burrow out of the ground through dime-sized holes en masse, with as many as 1.5 million cicadas emerging per acre, 0.4 hectares in some places. Power comes in numbers for the 17-year cicadas, who appear in throngs as a defense mechanism known as predator satiation. Of the 3,000 to 4,000 known cicada species, Brood X is unique to North America, along with another periodic species known as the 13-year cicada. The loud buzzing noise the males make, which is often as loud as a lawnmower or motorcycle, is the species' mating call. Females lay eggs inside slender tree branches, and once their work is done, the cicadas all die. When the eggs hatch, the larvae drop to the ground, burrow into the soil, and spend the next 17 years waiting to experience just a few weeks of daylight before their own lives end. 10. Attack on a shipwreck. A diver was spearfishing at the wreckage of a World War II vessel when he was stripped of his weapon and forced to get into an altercation with a shark. Captain Matt Wirt was caught on video literally fighting a shark with his bare hands while diving at the SS Papoose off the coast of North Carolina. It really doesn't get any more dramatic than that. The ship sank back in 1942 after getting smacked by a German torpedo. Ever since, it has been a playground for tiger sharks and other marine life. But these sharks weren't feeling very playful when Captain Wirt went down there with his spear and started stealing their fish. To protect their territory, the sharks attacked. They stole the captain's spear from out of his hands and tried to bite his face off. Luckily for the captain, his friend was nearby, and together, they managed to fight the sharks off and make an escape. Still, the captain has since said he'll be changing his equipment for future dives in case something like this happens again and he needs to make a quick getaway. 9. Giant Goliath Grouper. The giant Goliath grouper is one of the biggest and most delicious fish in the world. It's also a horrifying thing to see swimming directly at you while diving underwater. A diver and fisherman recently ran into some bad luck when he got into a bit of a tangle with this huge fish, some of which can grow to be up to 800 pounds and over 8 feet in length, with the Florida record being 680 pounds. This fierce battle went down in the Gulf of Mexico. The diver had just speared a fish when the grouper swam up and stole it right from his hands. Not only that, the grouper tried to take the diver's hand with it. The diver's entire hand and wrist got stuck in the dangerous fish's mouth, and rather than relent his hard-earned catch, the diver reached another hand in and tried to pull his fish back. In the end, the grouper was way stronger than the pitiful human. It easily ripped the fish away from the diver and swam off with it. The diver's just lucky the grouper didn't rip his arm off too. 8. Stabbed by a swordfish. A scuba diver is lucky to be alive after getting into a confrontation with a giant swordfish. For those who don't know, a swordfish comes with a literal sword attached to its faces, and when provoked, it can use that sword for murder. The diver was walking in the darkness off the coast of Brazil, just strolling along the ocean floor when from out of nowhere, the swordfish appeared. Without hesitation, it swam directly at the diver like a speeding bullet, and then impaled itself on the diver's oxygen equipment. The swordfish became stuck inside the mess of hoses and canisters on the guy's back, which was obviously pretty alarming. The diver needed that equipment to keep breathing. As the fish thrashed violently and tried to get itself free, the diver panicked, grabbed hold of the climbing rope, and hurried back up into his submerged vessel. He got away clean, but had the swordfish attacked him just a few inches to the right, the fish would have impaled his throat instead of his oxygen equipment. Even though it was a pretty horrifying event, the diver was still very lucky to get out alive. 7. Angry octopus. A diver was on a trip to Japan when he was manhandled by a giant octopus. This is probably the last creature you want manhandling you on a trip to the land of the rising sun. The Russian tourist was minding his own business in the Sea of Japan when the octopus came out of nowhere, chased the guy down, and began wrapping its slimy tentacles around him. The diver tried to get away before the octopus could rip his oxygen tank off, but all efforts seemed futile. The octopus grabbed hold of the guy and tried pulling him even deeper into the sea. It was probably trying to take him away to do creepy octopus things in the dark where nobody could see. The diver did manage to get himself free of the octopus eventually, only for it to return with a vengeance and grab onto the guy's flipper, trying to yank it off. It took another minute or two, but the octopus finally did give up and retreat to the rocks below, where it changed color to blend in with the seabed, and from there, the violent octopus vanished. 6. Seal attack. Believe it or not, seals are some of the most violent and unpredictable animals that attack people underwater. An underwater cameraman was trying to get some footage of young Cape fur seals when one of them decided to try and bite his head open. The seal attacked the diver from behind, literally sinking its teeth into the top of the guy's skull. The teeth of a seal are almost like dog teeth. It was as if a large dog were gnawing on the top of his skull, almost piercing his flesh and bone with its sharp teeth. It wouldn't let up either. The vicious animal attacked again and again, always at the top of the head, something that must have been extremely painful. We don't know if the seal thought the diver's head was a fish or what, but it definitely wanted to eat it. The seal even tried eating his camera, biting the piece of equipment repeatedly. The diver did get away alive, though halfway through the attack he turned off the camera, and we don't know what happened next. Chances are, he got the heck out of there before the seal managed to rip his diving suit open with its savage attacks. 5. Deadly moray eel. While diving in Cayo Coco, Cuba, someone got a bit more than they bargained for when a dangerous moray eel tried to rip his nose off. In the shocking video footage, we can see a group of 5 at the bottom of the seabed next to what appears to be a shipwreck. The people were swimming alongside colorful fish, exploring the coral, and checking out the creepy wreckage. Then the moray eel appeared. It singled out one of the divers and began swimming in and out of his arms and legs like a creepy green ribbon in the water. Then, all of a sudden, the eel lunged at the guy's face. It latched on and wouldn't let go, and the diver panicked, grabbed hold of the slippery eel and threw it away from him, but the damage was already done. The diver immediately kicked off the ground and began trying to reach the surface. The eel had messed up his face mask and he was in danger of drowning. It was lucky the other divers knew what they were doing, as they quickly swam to the guy's rescue, grabbed hold of his arms and helped him move up towards the surface, while another diver tried to help fix his face mask. He did escape with his life, though that moray eel just about did him in. 4. Tangled in a fishing net. Coast Guard divers and volunteers in Italy recently had to do something no divers ever want. Diving should always be a fun and relaxing experience, just taking in the wildlife. But north of the Sicilian Aeolian Islands, divers had to participate in an operation to free a sperm whale that had gotten stuck in a fishing net. And to make matters worse, the operation wasn't even a success. It took 3 days for the divers to try untangling the poor whale, who had got its fin completely covered in greasy old fishing nets. The divers were with Sea Shepherd, a marine conservation NGO. They tried their best to free the giant mammal from the fishing nets, as it had become slow and was having trouble swimming. But because the whale was in such disarray, it was very difficult for the divers to help free her. Keep in mind that a sperm whale weighs around 15 tons and can flip its tail hard enough to shatter a person's bones. According to diver Carmelo Isgro, even after 24 hours, the whale was still putting up a serious fight. At the end of the 3 days, divers managed to get off some of the net, but had to give up as the whale vanished deeper into the sea and never resurfaced. They never saw the whale again, but hopefully it's still alive. 3. Man-eating super squid. When Animal Planet underwater cameraman Scott Castle dove into squid-infested waters, he was not ready for what came next. He was just trying to get some footage of the Humboldt squids. Instead, he ended up being on the wrong side of a vicious frenzy. This happened in the waters off La Paz, Mexico. It turned into one of the most brutal squid attacks in recorded history. Soon after entering the water, these squids began to attack. They lashed out at him with their tentacles and bit him with their beaks. This is horrifying because a squid beak can bite down with more force than an African lion, according to Animal Planet. So sharp they can rip through pretty much anything. And it wasn't just one or two squids. Scott was being attacked by an entire gang of squids. One of the squids ripped his camera away so hard that his shoulder was dislocated. Scott tried hard to get away but was pulled down. Two squids grabbed his legs and pulled him down so quickly and with so much force that his eardrums ruptured and he screamed out in pain. He finally managed to swim towards the surface with his one good arm, only to have a squid swim up and bite his wrist so hard that it shattered in 5 places. Scott finally managed to get to the boat and out of the water, but he was in terrible shape afterward and needed to be taken to the hospital. 2. Killer whales. Even more vicious and deadly than the Humboldt squid is the killer whale. After all, it doesn't have killer in its name for no reason. When a diver was spearfishing in New Zealand, he came a little too close for comfort to a pod of killer whales. His name is Sam Galloway from the University of Auckland, and he had a very close encounter with this pod of whales, which included adult and young whales. While killer whales aren't exactly notorious for attacking humans in the wild, there was an incident in 2010 when a killer whale drowned their trainer at SeaWorld, proving just how big and powerful these beasts can be. They are also notorious for attacking boats. Luckily, Sam didn't get attacked this time. Some of the younger whales got curious and came to check him out, but the bigger whales left him pretty well alone. Still, Sam was smart enough to stay out of their way, as a single bite from a killer whale could have easily ripped his body clean in half. 1. Picked on by a shark. In Egypt, diver Alexander Krinkle was harassed and picked on by a shark in the Red Sea. He was diving with his friend near Brothers Island, a place with several different species of shark. These include oceanic whitetip, grey reef, silvertip, and hammerhead sharks. In this incident, it was an oceanic whitetip shark that attacked. After diving for 50 minutes, just when the diver was about to ascend, the shark appeared. According to Alexander, the shark got very close to him, which is unusual behavior, and as Alexander swam for the rope to get back to the surface, the shark attacked. It grabbed his right thigh and tried to rip it off his body. Its teeth were so sharp that it ripped his suit open and blood immediately started leaking out from his leg. As we all know, blood in the water is not a good thing when there are sharks around. The other divers were quickly taken out of the water by their guides, while Alexander was given first aid on the boat. The shark had done some pretty good damage to his thigh, but had it been trying a little harder, it could have torn open one of his arteries and caused him to bleed to death. Fortunately for Alexander, he walked away with nothing more than a shallow bite and just a little bit of trauma.
Number 10. Monstrous-looking mystery fish. A cryptic-looking blogspot post dating back to 2011 describes one Caribbean family's alleged discovery of a monstrous-looking fish along the Playa de Cienaguita de Limon in Costa Rica. 6 men had gone out fishing one day with plans to bring fish back home to their families for dinner. They took to the water with a trammel, which is actually illegal, and spent several hours moving along catching whatever crossed its path. One man, who spoke anonymously with a local news outlet, described taking the trammel out of the water and spotting the strange creature, which was moving around with part of his body opening. Since he'd never seen something like it before, the men took a closer look and quickly decided that they had no desire to eat the thing because it was so downright bizarre looking. Instead of releasing it back into the ocean, the group took the fish home to show their friends and relatives, who reportedly couldn't stop looking at the strange specimen. They took photos, although none seem to be available online today, with some spectators even suggesting that the creature had connections to extraterrestrials and UFOs. The discoverers supposedly dug a hole and buried the fish, although this entire story is questionable from the get-go. For one, the news source the blog is linked to no longer works, and other articles about the ordeal are virtually non-existent. leaving us to wonder whether the demonic-looking specimen was even real, and if so, the circumstances revolving around its discovery. Number 9. Pig-snouted brittle star. A newly described brittle star is making headlines for its bizarre appearance. It has arms that look like they're made of thousands of pig snouts. With the body measuring just 3 centimeters in diameter and 8 centimeter arms, it's very small. Unlike most brittle stars, which have 5 or 6 arms, this brittle star has 8, and its underside is equipped with long jaws and a collection of thorny teeth. These creatures lurk in the South Pacific, near the French-owned territory of New Caledonia, at depths between 360 and 560 metres, in an environment that scientists believe has remained largely unchanged for millions of years. It's been dubbed a living fossil and an evolutionary relic, as the pig-snouted brittle star hasn't really changed since the days of the dinosaurs. Researcher Tim O'Hara, who participated in a recent study on the creature, told Live Science that tropical marine habitats are good places for finding living fossils. He discovered the pig-snouted brittle star in 2015, 4 years after it was placed in a collection of unidentified specimens at the French National Museum of Natural History in Paris. A DNA test revealed that the species is not closely related to other echinoderms, including other brittle stars. Scientists consider it to be part of a new family, which they've named Ophioguridae. Paleontologist and study co-author Ben Tai remembered seeing a 180 million-year-old fossil with a similar pattern, leading experts to conclude that the new species is very ancient. O'Hara and his colleagues hope to discover more living fossils in the New Caledonia region. Number 8. Teeny tiny frog. During an expedition to Borneo's Kuba National Park in 2004, scientists discovered an extremely tiny orange and red frog species that grows to just 1 centimetre long while searching for lost amphibians. They named the pea-sized creature Microhyla nepenthicola after the small pitcher plant they found it living in, and it's the Old World's smallest known frog species. The frog lays its eggs within the plant, and its tadpoles live in what the BBC describes as an organic goo until they reach maturity. In addition to being distinctively small, the species has other traits that are unlike most frogs. Its tiny size and the so-called reduced webbing between its toes are believed to be evolutionary traits that help the frog navigate within the slippery pitcher plant it lives in. The only frog in the world smaller is called Eleutherodactylus iberia, and it is smaller than a dime and found in a handful of places in southern Cuba's Holguin province. Like many other creatures, it's under threat of extinction due to deforestation and could disappear before scientists get a chance to study it in depth. Number 7. Alligator fish hybrid. Earlier this year, a British expat in Singapore discovered the remains of a so-called prehistoric creature with an alligator's head and the body of a fish. It was found on the banks of the McRitchie Reservoir. The large animal seemed like a crocodile at first to Karen Lithgow. Upon taking a closer look, she realised it was what appeared to be a combination of 2 animals that cannot realistically even mate. Local officials identified the creature as an alligator gar, a fish species endemic to the southern United States. Described as a living fossil, it remains largely unchanged from the ancestors it evolved from. Authorities believe the dead fish ended up 16,000 kilometres from its native habitat through the pet trade. Young alligator gar specimens measuring just 20 centimetres long on average are available from local fish markets according to local media outlets. But they get much bigger, often reaching up to 2.4 metres long and weighing more than 130 kilos. When this one grew too large for someone to realistically take care of, or they decided they didn't want it for some other reason, its owner likely released it into local waters with no apparent concern for how it could affect the fragile ecosystem. In addition to being massive, alligator gars are unmanageable as pets because they can live for decades. They mature extremely slowly and typically can't reproduce until they're at least 10 years old. As this unfortunate ordeal shows, it's usually best to leave wildlife where it belongs, in the wild. Would you ever consider having an alligator gar as a pet? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Strange extinct lizard. A scientific paper published in early 2020 claimed that a tiny hummingbird-sized creature named the Oculus dentavis coungray, found inside a 99 million-year-old piece of amber, was the world's smallest dinosaur. The study was retracted later in the year, and new research suggests that the strange animal is a prehistoric lizard. The study's co-author, Juan Diego Daza, described it as unlike any lizard we have today. Scientists examined 2 specimens that were discovered in Myanmar and found that the lizards had scales, pointy dinosaur-like teeth attached directly to the jawbone rather than in sockets, and bulging lizard-like eye structures and shoulder bones, according to CNN. They were found to represent 2 different prehistoric lizard species, Oculus dentavus naga and Oculus dentavus coungray. Some of the confusion experts encountered stemmed from the creature's strange skulls, which they now believe were distorted by the amber that preserved them. The animals are also pretty strange looking compared to modern-day lizards, which further led researchers astray. These newly identified species lived between 145.5 and 66 million years ago during the Cretaceous period, when many modern-day lizard and snake groups evolved into existence. But they lack the characteristics of today's lizards, making them difficult to identify. Number 5. Australian trumpet. Commonly known as the giant whelk or the Australian trumpet, Syrinx aruos is a predatory marine snail found in the waters off northern Australia, eastern Indonesia, Papua New Guinea and other surrounding areas. Measuring up to 1 metre long and weighing as much as 18 kilograms, it's the world's largest snail species. Australian trumpets are found between the intertidal zone at depths of up to 50 metres, according to the Queensland Museum's website. They're often collected as pets or ornaments and are overfished, which is one reason they're reportedly verging on extinction. Large specimens are rarely seen and scientists know little about the creature's behaviour or habits. A massive Australian trumpet recently made headlines when it was spotted unusually out of place on the shore of the Godavari River in Andhra Pradesh, India. Instead of leaving the highly endangered creature alone, locals decided to auction it off and it sold for 18,000 rupees, roughly $240. Number 4. Wandering meatloaf. A mollusk that goes by the scientific name Cryptochiton stellari and is less formally known as the gumboot chiton or the giant western fiery chiton resembles what some have called a wandering meatloaf. Yep, I said what I said. This giant blob of meat, as Mike Wenner describes it in a Yahoo Entertainment article, contains a hard mineral that was previously only ever found in rocks. Using electron microscopes and other scientific instruments, a team of scientists examined the structure of the creature's teeth. They determined that it has unusually tough teeth since the gumboot chiton routinely scrapes them against hard rocks while it feeds on algae. Despite this practice, its teeth are left undamaged. But experts were surprised to find the mineral santobarbarite in the teeth, since it has never been found in a living creature, only in tiny amounts inside rocks. The chiton's teeth are attached to the soft tissue in its head by a hollow, tube-like bony structure called a stylus. This sparked researchers' interest for multiple reasons, including challenges in modern-day manufacturing that involve connecting ultra-hard materials to soft underlying structures. They believe that their answers may lie within nature, particularly species like the gumboot chiton, which evolved over hundreds of millions of years. Number 3. Triple hybrid warbler. In 2018, a birdwatcher in Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania observed a warbler with a combination of features that just didn't seem to go together. Video footage showed a male that sang like a chestnut-sided warbler, yet had the physical characteristics of blue-winged and gold-winged warblers. A study by experts at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology revealed that the bird was an extremely rare type of hybrid. Speaking with the Cornell Chronicler, lead study author David Howes explained that the female parent was a blue-winged and golden-winged warbler hybrid, while the male parent was a chestnut-sided warbler from a completely different genus. Researchers determined the triple hybrid warbler's parentage through a detailed and complex DNA analysis that replicated how it most likely inherited its genetics. This is the first recorded instance of a chestnut-sided warbler and either of the other 2 species successfully mating, which proves that they are genetically compatible despite long-standing evolutionary differences. Because it happened among a significantly declining golden-winged warbler population, Toes believed it may have been an instance of the female bird making the best of a bad situation. Experts are unsure of the potential implications of the triple hybrid's unique combination of features, but they believe that its mixed ancestry may give it the reputation of an outsider and make mating difficult. Meanwhile, hybridization between golden-winged and blue-winged warblers is so common, scientists are afraid that they will eventually cease to be 2 distinct species. Number 2. Pinocchio frog. The Latoria Pinocchio, also known as the northern Pinocchio tree frog, was discovered back in 2008 at the Fohar Mountains of Indonesia's Papua province, but it was not officially described as a new species until recently in 2019. After herpetologist Paul Oliver spotted it by accident, the creature was informally called the Pinocchio frog for years to come. Unlike Pinocchio, the frog's unusual protruding downward-pointing nose, also called a rostrum, doesn't expand or shrink based on whether it's lying or being truthful. Instead, it inflates when the frog calls and deflates when the frog is calm and quiet. This bizarre nose is also seen in several related species found throughout Papua New Guinea, including Latoria cristali, Latoria havina, and more. Oliver and the other scientists are trying to figure out what exactly the frogs of the Latoria genus use their strange noses for. Mating is one possibility, although experts found no correlation between the size of the frog's nose and their choice in mating partners. Another theory suggests that the distinctive schnozzes help Pinocchio frogs identify one another by species, since Papua New Guinea contains more frog species than any other island in the world, with 450 identified and many more waiting to be discovered. Number 1. Psychedelic frogfish. Discovered in the waters off Ambon Island and Bali, Indonesia in 2009, the psychedelic frogfish is named after its trippy pink and white striped pattern. The species, which is a type of anglerfish, grows to just 15 centimetres long, but its swirling unique pattern makes a big statement, except in cases where it uses it to camouflage itself from predators. Unlike other frogfishes, its yellowish-brown colour never changes, and it's unique among other anglerfish species because the lure on its head is rather small. This flat-faced fish is capable of jutting its jaw forward and expanding its head, which it seems to do the most at times when it's not feeding. So far, scientists have found the psychedelic frogfish at depths between 5 and 7 metres, roughly 20 metres from the shoreline. In addition to its bizarre patterning, the species also walks on its pectoral fins along the seafloor. It also pushes off from the bottom using these fins along with a jet propulsion mechanism that makes it resemble a bouncing beach ball. The psychedelic frogfish is not equipped with any major defence mechanism against predators, but avoids becoming prey by hiding in small spaces and camouflaging itself using its otherwise conspicuous pattern. Scientists know relatively little information about this funky-looking creature, which was photographed in the wild for the first time back in 2008.
11. Tallulah the turtle. In early 2016, a young barnacle-encrusted loggerhead turtle washed ashore on Gwythian Beach in Cornwall, England. She was weak and dehydrated, and at first, rescuers were not sure if she would survive. Staff members at the Blue Reef Aquarium in Newquay removed the goose barnacles from the turtle, who they named Tallulah, and slowly but surely, she regained her health. Employee Steve Matchett, who likened the condition Tallulah was found in to that of a dead animal in a BBC interview, described her recovery as little short of a miracle. The Irish Navy transported Tallulah and another recently healed turtle 2,000 miles to the waters of Gibraltar and set the pair free. Rescuers always hope that the lost turtles they return to sea manage to stay in their habitats, but it appears as though more and more are being found elsewhere in recent years. The month before Tallulah became stranded, 16 warm-water turtles appeared on England's beaches. Experts blame devastating winter storms, which blow the creatures off their path and into places they wouldn't normally go. For loggerheads and other species who are not built for cold water, the effects are devastating. The lower temperatures cause their bodies to shut down, leaving rescuers with a very narrow window of opportunity for saving a stranded turtle's life. Their rehabilitation often requires months of around-the-clock care, and sadly, they don't always survive. 10. Field-sized fungus. In thinking about the largest living organisms on Earth, we often skip right to animals and overlook plants and fungi, yet the number one spot for this title goes to a honey mushroom, Armillaria solidipes, formerly Armillaria ostei, specimen in Malheur National Forest, Oregon. Its discovery began with the US Forest Service investigation of the surrounding area in 1998 amid unexplained die-off of large numbers of trees. Tests revealed that nearly all the trees were infected with honey fungus and that many of them were taken down by a single colony of specimens derived from a single organism. Scientists determined that the fungus is anywhere from 1,900 to 8,650 years old, and that it covers a 3.7 square mile or 10 kilometers squared area, making it even bigger than the previous record holder for the world's largest living organism, a honey mushroom specimen in Michigan that occupies 37 acres or 15 hectares. These massive mushrooms are connected via an underground network of tissues called mycelia. Lifeforms like these have long called into question what constitutes a singular organism. Scientists believe A. solidipes fits the criteria because its cells are genetically identical clones who correspond with one another and share a common purpose. 9. Free dental work. Most people and animals alike know better than to go anywhere near a crocodile's mouth, out of a fear of losing a body part or being crushed or killed. But the Egyptian plover, nicknamed the crocodile bird, flies straight into the Nile crocodile's open mouth and comes out not only alive, but entirely unscathed. I can see you asking, how? In what's known as a symbiotic relationship, where two different biological organisms benefit from one another, the small bird feeds on decomposing pieces of meat between the crocodile's teeth, keeping the reptile's mouth clean and infection-free. It's surprising to see an animal that is so prone to aggression welcome a much smaller and more vulnerable creature anywhere near it with open arms, but the Nile crocodile apparently appreciates the value of some free dental work. In fact, when one finds themselves in need of some routine cleaning, they'll simply wait with their mouths open for plover birds to drop by and grab a bite to eat. 8. Submerged forest. In the Tian Shan Mountains in Kazakhstan, there's a lake filled with dead spruce trees that jut out of the water, making for a scenic but eerie sight. Known as Kindy Lake, the 1,300-foot-long or 400-meter body of water was formed following an earthquake in 1911, which triggered a landslide that created a natural dam and filled with rainwater. The site is famous for its beauty, with the trees standing in contrast to the turquoise backdrop of the lake's water. Even more stunning is when the lake is frozen over or when a misty fog lurks over the water, according to a Discovery.com article by Mike Epiphany. The view is equally stunning underwater because the trees have not decomposed, with even the needles remaining attached, resulting in what looks like a submerged forest. It's the lake's frigid temperatures, which rarely exceed 43 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 Celsius even during the summer, that has kept the trees so well preserved for so long. For all its allure and splendor, Kindy Lake sees relatively few visitors. It's more remote than some of the country's other, more easily accessible tourist attractions. An off-roading vehicle is required to reach the site, but those who have been there will say it was worth the effort. 7. Male pregnancies. In the animal kingdom, females typically birth and raise their young and are the primary caregivers, even if the male is involved in the offspring's upbringing. But these roles are reversed among 3 known marine creatures, including seahorses, pipefish, and sea dragons. How, you may ask? Male seahorses have a brood pouch on the front of their bodies. Females deposit their eggs into the pocket, where the male fertilizes and carries them until they are born. The eggs hatch 2 to 4 weeks after being fertilized, when the male starts to experience contractions. Anywhere between 50 and 2,000 fry, or baby seahorses, come out of his body. Equipped with a similar brood pouch, male pipefish give birth to anywhere between 5 and 40 offspring. Interestingly, these dads tend to not take care of their young if they don't like their mother, and they take the best care of the offspring they have with larger and more attractive females. Sea dragons are related to both seahorses and pipefish, but they do not have a brood pouch. Instead, females deposit a few hundred eggs into tiny cups on the male's tail, where they spend the next 4 to 6 weeks fertilizing. It takes several days for the eggs to hatch. 6. Psychedelic swamp. While the Florida swamps are certainly known for having some weird and downright scary wildlife, they didn't have a reputation for being very pleasing to the eye until 2016, when social media user Michael Hussey posted a photo of a rainbow-colored psychedelic swamp to the Florida Landscapes Facebook page. Taken in Tallahassee, the image shows water of various shades, including blue, pink, purple, yellow, and green. The colors appear every year around February or March, when leaves and other plant life start to decompose, releasing natural oils and tannic acids that create the Technicolor effect. Under the right sunlight, these swamps glimmer in an array of eye-catching hues, somewhat resembling the look of spilled oil. Patches of water that look very inky with dark red undertones, known as black water, are also an effect of the decomposition process. Have you ever seen a psychedelic swamp firsthand? Let me know in the comments below, but first, be sure to subscribe. 5. Mustached bird. Not many members of the animal kingdom sport mustaches, but some do, and a bird called the incoterm is arguably the most magnificent among them. Both male and female specimens are equipped with a white handlebar mustache that stands out against the bird's dark grey plumage. The length of the mustache is a major determining factor when it comes to choosing a mate, because birds with longer mustaches are considered healthier. As a result, they tend to have more active dating lives. When two incoterms with long mustaches mate, they have more and larger offspring than those who are less well-equipped. Found along South America's west coast from northern Peru to central Chile, the species gets its name from the powerful empire that once ruled the region. While the incoterm was once abundant, with a population numbering in the millions, its numbers have declined to an estimated 150,000 left out in the wild due to overfishing resulting in a decreased supply of anchovies and other food sources. Breeding is also difficult for these unique birds due to invasive predators like rats, natural disasters, and the guano or bat poop harvesting industry. All things considered, it's clearly a good thing that the most eligible incoterms instinctively know how to seek each other out, thereby optimizing the species' chances of survival. 4. Catatumbo lightning. The people who live where the Catatumbo River meets Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela witness the world's highest concentration of lightning, which occurs 300 days out of the year on average. Known as Catatumbo lightning, it strikes 250 times per square kilometer or 0.4 miles per year in the region where 1/4 of the country's population lives, according to NASA's Earth Data website. Scientists believe that winds blowing across Lake Maracaibo and nearby swampy plains, which are surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, create the perfect conditions for the seemingly constant lightning, which actually varies in frequency. In fact, it even stopped for several months between January and March 2010 during a drought, leading some people to believe it was over for good. Not surprisingly, lightning strikes 3 to 4 times as many people in Catatumbo as it does in the US, and a lot of people die from it. NOAA physicist and researcher Ángel G. Muñoz said in an interview with writer Agnieszka Gautier, a 2016 study determined that the Catatumbo lightning is more predictable than experts originally believed, and that it can be forecasted months in advance. Discoveries like these could prove to make the region much safer for its residents, who must live to learn at the mercy of the beautiful but deadly phenomenon. 3. Choking slime. Some animals have shockingly unique ways of defending themselves against predators. One of them is the deep-dwelling eel-like hagfish, which is the only known creature that has a skull but lacks a vertebral column. Hagfish are jawless and have remained largely unchanged for the last 300 million years or so, earning them a reputation as living fossils. Equally strange to the hagfish itself is its defense mechanism, which involves releasing strings of fibrous material that explode into slime and choke the attacker. A 2019 study describing the behavior explains that hagfish have slime glands that they release the threads from in a coiled state. In just a fraction of a second, the threads of mucus unravel and become entangled as they expand to 10,000 times their original size and blanket the predator. Worst case scenario, the predator asphyxiates and dies. Best case scenario, the cloud of mucus distracts the predator, enabling the hagfish to swim away. Because hagfish slime is made of thin fibers, it's stickier and more durable than the slime of other creatures and is incredibly effective. 2. Bowling Ball Beach. Located at the northern end of Schooner Gulch State Beach in Mendocino, California, Bowling Ball Beach contains a collection of large, round rocks along the shore measuring between 6.5 and 9.8 feet, 2 to 3 meters in diameter, which were exposed during low tide. At first glance, the spherical formations are mysterious. How did the rocks get there, and why are they so perfectly round? Their presence has given rise to numerous outlandish theories relating to dinosaurs, aliens, and other things, suggesting that something, or someone, other than nature created the formations. But these balls are actually concretions of materials that are harder than the surrounding mudstone that they sit in. As the Pacific Ocean eroded the landscape over millions of years, the receding mudstone disappeared and the remaining particles gathered together, forming the so-called bowling balls. This seemingly otherworldly phenomenon is known to occur elsewhere, including New Zealand, where there are 2 collections of concretions known as the Moiraki boulders, which measure between 1.6 and 7.2 feet, or 0.5 to 2.2 meters in diameter, and the Kutu boulders, which have a diameter of up to 10 feet, or 3 meters. Stone spheres can also be found in North Dakota's Cannonball River, Kazakhstan's Valley of the Balls, and in other places. 1. Striped icebergs. You may be surprised to learn that not all icebergs are the pristine, snow-white masses we usually see in pictures. But icebergs sometimes bear a surprising array of hues in the form of colored stripes that are usually blue, green, yellow, and/or brown, with blue being the most common. Typically found in Antarctica, striped or banded icebergs form under special conditions. For example, blue stripes appear when crevices are filled with water and it freezes too quickly to form any bubbles, according to ZME Science. It's probably a good time to mention that the average iceberg appears white because it's formed from compressed snow, which reflects light from all directions. Green stripes result from algae-rich water infiltrating an iceberg's crevices, while yellow, brown, and black stripes are usually caused by different sediments that the iceberg picked up while sliding downhill at an earlier point in time. Sedimentary bands also form when an iceberg's layers melt and refreeze. It takes hundreds or thousands of years for a banded iceberg to form, according to the Daily Mail. While striped glaciers are not exactly rare, they're also not very common, and people seldom get the opportunity to see one firsthand. Certain colored stripes are easier to catch a glimpse of than others, as hobby blogger Dusty Pierce points out on his website. Green stripes, for example, are usually hidden on the underbelly of an ice mass, and they tend to only become visible when the iceberg flips over and before it melts.
Number 10. Miss Baker, the space monkey. Miss Baker is the original space monkey, or maybe I should say, was the original space monkey. In May of 1959, Miss Baker and Miss Abel became the first United States animals to complete a flight beyond our atmosphere and into the beyond, into the great unknown. Miss Baker was a Peruvian squirrel monkey. She was selected from a small group of 25 other monkeys who had all been trained at the Naval School of Aviation Medicine. If this sounds completely ridiculous, that's because it is. There was a literal training program in the 50s to teach monkeys how to go up into space. While Miss Baker is the most famous, she had another monkey friend with her too, Miss Abel, who was also stuffed into a little monkey flight capsule, dressed in a specially designed spacesuit, wired up with electrodes, and then flung into space. The suborbital flight only lasted 15 minutes. The monkeys travelled 300 miles or almost 500 kilometres above the surface and then came back down to Earth. Amazingly, both Miss Baker and Miss Abel weren't dead. After this, they were flown to Washington for a press conference and treated like celebrities. Miss Baker was transferred to the US Space and Rocket Center in 1971, where she went on public display. She died of natural causes in 1984. Number 9. Muscled mice. Genetically modified mice were recently sent to the International Space Station. When I say genetically modified, I'm talking about real super mice, modified by science to be extra strong. Are you picturing a little mouse flexing right now? Anyways, 40 female mice from a lab in Maine were manipulated using genetics to have their muscles grow significantly larger than ordinary mice, about twice as much. It was an experiment known as Rodent Research 19, and it was designed to study how bone density and skeletal muscle mass can be damaged by prolonged time spent in space. Specifically, scientists were interested in using special treatments to block molecular signaling pathways to prevent muscle and bone density from being lost without gravity. This sounds like a lot of crazy science, and it honestly is. Scientists use a special agent to block the pathways of the genetically modified mice. There was also a control of mice that didn't receive the agent. Those that received it maintained and in some cases increased muscle mass even without any gravity. They also recovered quicker once returning to Earth. The consensus here is that by blocking certain hormones in the brain, scientists can actually prevent muscle loss in the animals when stuck in space with no gravity. Fascinating. Number 8. Laika, the space dog. Laika was a Soviet space dog who became one of the first animals to enter space. She was the first animal that ever orbited our planet, which was a pretty successful accomplishment for a stray dog who started life on the streets of Moscow. Depending on how you feel about animal rights and stuff, you may consider this quite the come-up story. She went on the spacecraft Sputnik 2, which was launched into low orbit on November of 1957. But the story of Laika is actually a very sad one. According to the Smithsonian magazine, there was no plan for her recovery or survival. The brutal Russians sent her into space with no intention of bringing her back to the surface alive. Because of this, the poor dog died either from overheating or because of asphyxiation shortly after entering outer space. This may seem extremely cruel, and it most definitely is, but at the same time, at that time, there wasn't actually the technology yet to bring an animal back from space. Scientists also believed that humans would never be able to survive being launched off-world. The only way to test it, the Soviets saw, was to let a dog try. The experiment proved that a living passenger would indeed survive the micro-G environment, and it helped pave the way for the first humans to be launched into space. So while Laika tragically died in outer space, she also paved the way for the future of space travel. Number 7. The first cat in space. 6 years after the Russians launched Laika the dog into space, sending the poor pup to her death, the first cat was then launched into space. The big difference here is that the cat survived. The feline was named Felicette, and to this day she is the only cat that has ever survived a solo journey into space. Space cat! It was part of a suborbital mission in 1963, and it only lasted about 15 minutes. She was recruited by France as part of a rigorous training program involving 14 cats. She was chosen as the most promising candidate and launched from a French base in the Sahara Desert. She travelled to an altitude of 100 miles, or about 160 km above the surface of Earth, and after 15 minutes the capsule containing the cat detached from its rocket and fell back to the ground. The parachute safely deployed and the cat was rescued, still alive. But things get pretty gruesome for our feline friend. Just a handful of months after her safe return, scientists euthanized her, cut her out her brain and studied it in the name of science. In 2017, a Kickstarter campaign was launched for the brave space cat to get her a memorial. Just recently, after receiving $57,000 in donation, Felicette finally got the memorial she deserves. How do you feel about animals being launched into space? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. NASA's space fish. NASA recently sent 32 fish into space. The fish went up with 3 astronauts, including Commander Kevin Ford. They journeyed to the International Space Station. But just why in the world would NASA send fish to space? According to Business Insider, it was part of an experiment to see how microgravity would impact marine life. Specifically, scientists were interested in seeing what kind of skeletal changes would happen to fish in an environment without gravity. Basically, they just did this because they could. The fish chosen for the mission were Madagascar fish, a type of freshwater fish found in Southeast Asia. Because they have transparent skin and it's easy to see their internal organs, they made the perfect experimental candidates. They were put into a specialised aquatic habitat. Shortly after, they died. The fish began dropping like flies, though of course they couldn't actually drop because there was no gravity to pull them down. The fish died one by one for unknown reasons, though a biologist might suggest that the stress of being taken from a river in Southeast Asia to the International Space Station may have had something to do with it. The dead fish were sent back to Earth as specimens to be studied, while researchers preserved the few fish that still lived in the freezer. Chances are, those are dead too. As for what scientists learned about fish bones in space, well, they haven't actually published any of their findings just yet. Number 5. Ham the chimp. In the 1950s, NASA was at work training chimpanzees to fly a spacecraft. After all, chimps are our closest biological relatives in the animal world, and it made sense to send a chimp into space before a person. This kind of thing would never fly today, but in the 1950s it really was the Wild West of science. The monkey chosen was one of 40 chimps acquired for the program. All the chimps were trained in G-force simulators at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. But the most important training was for the chimps to learn to pull a simple lever whenever a blue light flashed on. To do this, scientists would reward the chimp with a banana each time it pulled the lever at the appropriate time. When the chimp failed, it would get an electric shock to its feet. Horrible, I know. In the end, the training worked though. A chimp named Ham was chosen in 1961 to be the first hominid sent into space. He was allegedly chosen out of 6 promising participants because before the flight he was feisty and in a good mood. During the flight, Ham performed exceptionally well. The monkey was one of the first ever to experience over 6 minutes of weightlessness. When the blue light came on, he pulled the lever. This proved that humans could perform simple functions in space. The mission only lasted about 16 minutes and then Ham the chimp splashed down in the ocean. He survived and lived the rest of his life in a zoo in North Carolina, dying in 1983 at the ripe old chimp age of 25. Number 4. The bullfrogs. On November 9, 1970, NASA sent a pair of bullfrogs to space in the name of science. The bullfrogs were tucked inside a small satellite. The poor bullfrogs had no idea the one-way journey they were about to embark upon. The bullfrogs orbited the planet for 6 whole days, along with a heap of small instruments and sensors. Back on Earth, scientists were observing the effects of zero gravity on the confused and probably very upset bullfrogs. And believe it or not, it was all about the inner ear. Scientists wanted to know how the inner ear balance mechanism would function in a space environment. The mission was dubbed Orbiting Frog Otolith 1, the otolith being the piece of the inner ear that scientists were interested in. The frogs were secured inside of special living containers outfitted with heaters and artificial lungs to keep them alive. However, before they were sent into space, scientists disconnected their ability to move by cutting their nerve endings. The experiment was a success. Scientists found out that after a couple of days, the frog's ears normalised. In other words, scientists learned that people's ears could more or less get used to being in the great vacuum of space. As for the frogs, well, they died. Number 3. Space spiders. Spiders have actually been sent into space more than once. One of the more recent experiments was by NASA to discover how arachnids operated in zero gravity. You may have noticed that when spiders sit in their webs, they always have their head pointed down. This is so that they can catch their prey faster, moving in the direction of gravity. To find out how they would adapt to living in space, NASA sent a few different spider species to the International Space Station back in 2008. One of the spiders escaped and vanished, which is totally understandable. One minute you're just sitting in your web, the next you're being sent into space? Heck no, I'd try to escape too. Then the other 2 spiders couldn't quite figure out how to spin their webs in that kind of environment, and they got tangled up. The last horrible thing that went wrong was that the flies sent to be the food for the spiders reproduced far faster than expected, and after about 2 weeks the researchers couldn't even see the spiders because they were literally buried under a mountain of space flies. It was a total disaster and one of the biggest experimental failures with insects ever on the ISS. In 2011, when the opportunity for a similar experiment on board the ISS came up again, Dr. Samuel Joschke of the University of Basel got involved to prepare and analyse their new attempt. This time, the experiment would go differently. It started with 4 spiders of the same species. 2 flew to the ISS in separate habitats, and the other 2 stayed on Earth in separate habitats. The ones on Earth were kept and observed under identical conditions as their fellows travelling in space, except that they were exposed to terrestrial gravity instead. Number 2. Microscopic worms. Speaking of weird insect experiments, worms were launched into space in 2018, and there's a follow-up mission planned for 2021. The missions are part of an experiment to better understand why astronauts lose their muscle mass while living in space. As you may already know, after 6 months in space, an astronaut can lose up to a shocking 40% of their muscle mass. The worms were supposed to help them with that. The worms were quite small, only able to be seen under a microscope. Still, they do share some essential characteristics with humans. We both use muscles to move from one place to another. On board the International Space Station, the worms are to be put inside of a special device crafted as an obstacle course for the microscopic worms. A microscopic camera will then watch how the worms manoeuvre through the obstacle course and how their movements change over time. The experiment was already done once between 2018 and 2019, but the findings were never released. Now there's a new project happening in 2021 involving the same worms and trying to solve the same problem. We're hoping this time there will be more scientific revelations made thanks to the brave worms. Number 1. The sex space geckos. The Russians recently sent 5 geckos into space as part of a weird sex experiment, and they all died. According to the BBC, the geckos probably froze to death after the heating system malfunctioned. But just what exactly was this weird Russian space sex gecko experiment? It was actually pretty legit. The scientists wanted to study the effects of weightlessness on the sex lives of geckos. For what reason? Beats me. Unfortunately, they didn't get any results because they all froze to death. However, the fruit flies that were sent into space with the geckos as food survived and reproduced. Nobody really wanted that to happen, but at least it's proof that flies, the most annoying things in the world, can still turn into huge pests in space. Thanks for watching. How did you feel about the animals in space? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe for more great stuff. See you next time. Bye.